So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we're here tonight and what we're going to cover. But essentially, what I'd like you to discover tonight is the Furmint grape, which is one of Hungary's key signature grapes, really. It's a fantastic white grape. I discovered it a few years ago myself, and through a friend who brought me a bottle of amazing wine from the Tokai region, which actually turned out to be from the same village as Barta winery. I was absolutely amazed by this wine, but at that point, there wasn't any chance really of adding anything to similar to Corning Barry's portfolio, because we weren't really ready for it, and our customers weren't really ready for it, despite these wines being magic. Anyway, a few years on, I thought that we were ready to actually try and find a winery of our own. And I was desperate to find a wine like the one I tasted, but I didn't have a record of which wine it was. I didn't have a memory of the label. All I knew was that I had to find this wine. And so I contacted a lady called Lila O'Connor, who is here in the audience tonight. And I was trying to describe to her which wine I wanted. And I had an exact image of this wine in my mind. And we tried between us for about 2 years to find this perfect wine. It had become a holy grail. In fact, in the end, I got to the point where I thought I'd actually made it up or imagined it or something. But at the last attempt, Lila O'Connor said, "Hold on a minute, I know." And she brought me some samples of Barta wines from Mad. In fact, it was this exact bottle, the Orekirai 2015, and she said, "I've got a feeling that this could be the one." And I took a sip of this wine and I knew it was the one, which is rare. It doesn't often happen like that when you're in the wine buying world. Anyway, not a very long time after, I found myself going out to Hungary to visit Barta winery and the team there with Lila, and it was the most fantastic visit and sealed the deal. Quite rare, normally doesn't quite happen that way, but it was a fantastic moment. So I got to meet Carolee Barta, who is the owner, founder of Barta winery, who has really taken this winery from nothing, restored old vineyards which had been abandoned under communism, and has brought them back to their glory. And he made the very smart move of hiring Vivien. She tells me it's Ujvári. I thought it was Ujvári, but anyway, that's my poor pronunciation. Of hiring Vivi, who has got, who's from Hungary, but has extensive winemaking experience from places all around the world, and she's come back to Hungary with all this amazing experience which she's bringing to bear on the wines today, and really helping to take Furmint to a new height. So tonight we're going to explore Barta winery. We're going to explore Vivi's approach to the Barta wines, and I hope that by the end of it you will really get to understand why I was so captivated by these Furmint wines and what makes them so wonderful, which is pleasing our customers now. So I'm just going to explain what we're going to do. So we'll first explore the world of Furmint through 2 off-dry wines, which are the first 2 wines which you by now obviously have in your glass. I'm going to embarrass myself now. I call it Eggy Kiss. Vivi, what is it?
Egg Kiss.
Thank you.
It was almost perfect.
Oh,
you were very close. Your Hungarian is very good.
So it's our first wine of the night, and the second drier style, the Orekirai Dulo Furmint 2015. So we're going to compare and contrast those styles, which are actually quite different, to give you an insight into how Furmint can be made depending on where it's been grown, its particular site within actually quite a close proximity, and also then what winemaking techniques can bring to bear in the wine itself. And then in the second part of the tasting, we're going to taste a sweet wine, the Samorodny, which you also have in your special pack from 2013, which is a sweet iteration of the Furmint grape. we, Oz, Vivien and I are also going to be tasting a very rare wine that Barta Winery make, and we don't have it here, enough of it here to be able to include this in the pack tonight. But we will be hoping to make it available at some stage in future. So we're going to include it in the tasting, not least because it won an absolute mega gong at this year's Decanter World Wine Awards. So we wanted to get Oz's thoughts on that too, and have a bit of a discussion. So just want to also introduce Oz Clarke, who is an expert in Hungary, and he has agreed to present with Vivi tonight his views on Hungary and the Tokaj region, and Barta Winery, who he's been to visit also a few times himself. So Oz, we're very pleased to have you here with us tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely delighted to be here. I have to say, I knew Hungarian wine before any other wine. We weren't a wine drinking family at home at all. We had 2 bottles of wine a year in our house, 1 bottle of red and 1 bottle of white for Christmas. And the bottle of red every single year was bull's blood, Egri Bikaver, bull's blood. That was the only red wine that I had any knowledge of at all until I went to university. And when I got to university, the second tasting I did at university, there was a wonderful great bear of a man called Russell Hone, came down from a company called F&E May, who had the exclusive rights for Hungarian wines in England. And he came down and gave a tasting of wines which were, even looking back now, I can't think of any modern white wines, because they were almost all white, like them. They were viscous. They were almost oily, but they were tangy and streaked with lemon or lime, and they were fiery and intensive on your tongue and intruding onto your palate. They were golden, but they were green. Hugh Johnson called them stiff, and they surged through your mouth, leaving the jangles and the bumptious din of their contradictory flavors clinging to the side of your throat. They were quite astonishing. And they had names like Mori Ezerio, Debroi Harshelevelu, Badakshoni Zhirkebarat, Badakshoni Keknielu, Kiraili Leanica, all these kind of names. You just thought, where am I? But the last wine was called Tokaj, and I could just about manage to pronounce that. Now, Tokaj is sweet to very sweet, but this Tokaj, I still remember, was marked by an acidity that literally shimmered through it like the beam of an icy North Star, turning simple honeyed sweetness into a dense and raging nectar that pummels your palate, with a full spectrum of orange to kumquat to tamarind to quince and marmalade richness. And I'm looking back, I think most sweet wines make your eyelids droop, but Tokaj rubs paprika behind them and makes them smart and sweat. And in the last century, the 20th century, the highest mark I gave to any wine in the 20th century was a 1957 Six Petonius Tokaj, which I had in Stockholm. And I just thought, this is just about the most perfect wine. But it took me a while to get to Hungary on a wine trip. I'd been there, I'd sung in Hungary, in Budapest. I had had a massage in Budapest. Now, this was given to me by a sort of 16-stone Valkyrie in a white uniform down by the Danube, who resembled, frankly, she resembled Rosa Klebb from Russia with Love. So I think it put me off massages for a long time, put me off women wearing white uniforms for quite a long time, put me off just about everything for quite a long time, to be honest. But when I got to Hungary finally on a wine trip, I was really excited to get to the country and also to get to Tokai. And I wasn't disappointed because the food was as rip-roaring and as monumental as I'd hoped. And the vineyards, especially those of Tokai, were as exciting and as beautiful as I'd hoped. And the language was as incomprehensible as I had feared, because it's supposed to be the most difficult language to learn in the world. Well, I have learnt just one phrase, and this is the only phrase that any visitor to any country will ever need. And it is as follows. Kate shirt kerem, obaratom fizet. Try that out on your friends. So Vivien, now tell us about yourself.
Sorry, now I'm afraid of speaking because your Hungarian is almost better than my English. So I arrived to Tokai in 2013 and I started to work for Barta Winery in 2016, and I'm very happy to work here since I love the soil, the aspects of view, the altitude, also the steepness of the hill, and I'm thinking about right now the Öreg Királydőlő, so the Old King vineyard, and I also love Tokai because of the Nobel Road, and that's the reason I am actually here. Since I was born in another wine region at the Lake Balaton, at Balaton wine region, but and I was working also, as Rebecca mentioned, in New Zealand, Australia, and also in California, Napa Valley, but my passion was always to come to Tokai. I was always long to work in Tokai, and I'm just very happy that I can work here at the Öreg Királydőlő and to work for Barta family, because they invested so much into this wine region and into the Öreg Királydőlő.
Thanks, Vivi. Well, I think it's about time now that we move on to our tasting, because I'm sure that by now, especially with the rip-roaring and the bumptious din and the shimmering, we really need to go into this raging nectar before any further ado. I mean, I can hardly contain myself. So we're going to compare and contrast these first two wines. So if you weren't online when I first said, please do make sure that you've got the first two wines in glasses in front of you. So the first wine is the Eggikish. Is that okay?
Furmint is just too good to miss, Rebecca.
Too good to miss. And the Öreg Királydőlő from 2015. And I'm going to ask Vivi and Oz between them to give their impressions, and also for them to explain a little bit why this wine tastes the way it does. Oz, could you give us your impressions first of all of the wine? And also, by the way, in the audience, if you have any questions about the wines at all, do ping them onto the chat box and we'll try and answer them at the end of this first part of the tasting.
I think that this is a thrilling wine, this Eggikish. You call it something like an entry-level wine, but I don't see it like that at all. I think it is a supreme example of what an exciting grape the Furmint can be. And having now tasted a fair number of dry Furmints, how different the Furmint flavors are in every single different vineyard. And it's one of the most exciting things about Furmint, that certainly the way that the winemaking is at the moment in Tokai, it hasn't been standardized. people haven't started saying, oh, that wine got 98 points in some American magazine, so we better try and make the wine like that. People are actually letting it express itself. And I think that the fact that it's an incredibly acid grape is enormously important. They say it's the most acid of any of the major grapes in the whole of Europe.
May I put some wine facts? The acidity is 7.3 at the Egykish, what we are tasting right now.
7.3.
Yes, so long acid backbone.
That's an entirely healthy acid. But it's interesting, Vivien, because I wanted to ask you about your New Zealand experiences at St. Clair, because I feel that this is doing a job which is done by New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but it's doing it in a very different way, because what's surprising is how mouth-filling it is. This is a fresh, sort of unoaked style of wine, really fills your mouth. And at the same time as it fills your mouth, it hits you straight away with a saline quality, almost as though you just briefly licked a piece of salt as you were then going into fruits, which are much more like lemon sherbet, that kind of sweet sour thing. This is what I love about Furmint. It revels in its sourness because it wraps it round with perfumes and fruits and flavors. There's a perfume which is still citrus. It's still yellow and green. It's like lemon flower or something. It's not like roses or jasmine or something. It's like lemon flower. That lovely fresh quality that lemon flowers have, and the fruit gets that crunchiness of nice raw new season apples, just a good English apple straight off the bough. And then what I also noticed in this wine and in the Ore Kirai, you really can taste something mineral. Now, I think this mineral thing is a word that's greatly overused. And often means nothing except people have left some sulfides in the wine. But this wine and the Ore Kirai, and indeed, frankly, the sweeter wine as well, I feel as though I can taste something coming from that vineyard. So altogether, I must admit, I think it's an absolutely tremendous example of an entirely modern wine, which goes right back to its ancient vineyards and its ancient grape variety. But I do remember at the end of the last century, 20 years ago, you couldn't give away white dry wines in Tokai. I remember the government used to spend millions of pounds every year on buying up undrinkable, unsaleable, dry Tokai wines that nobody wanted. And then when they started modernizing, they made them extremely alcoholic. They made them extremely dry, and they put them all in new oak, and they were still completely undrinkable. And this, with its fruit, with some residual sugar, it's high acid, and it's minimal oak, seems to me to be an absolutely fabulous modern white wine, and welcome to the pantheon of great drinkable white wines.
I think for somebody who's maybe used to Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, this is a fantastic next step into wine, don't you? I mean, it's also, I mean, I love Sauvignon Blanc as well as a grape, and I don't want to sort of say something is better than another, but it really is Sauvignon with additional joy.
It is.
Maybe the complexity is different a little bit. It's more wide under palate.
So Vivi, can you tell those here what you did to make it taste this way? Just a little bit of information.
Yes. First of all, I would like to speak just a tiny bit about the soil, because Mad and the whole Tokai wine region has a volcanic soil, and the soil is very diverse. The volcanic activation started 9 million years ago, and we have under rocks red clay soil, lots of rhyolite, physiolite, and also we have limestone. And this wine is also reflecting these stones, the minerality, and that's what you have undercurried. And that's where the nice acid backbone is coming from. On the other hand, when we are doing the vintage, the viticulturist and me as a winemaker, we are going out to the vineyard and we are checking out the grape, and only the ripened ones, the ones which are. Oh, thank you very much for this picture. Now we are at the top of the working vineyard, and you can see almost the whole mud valley, and you can see also the rocks, the rhyolite tuff, and at the bottom of the picture. And this is the terroir where the grapes are coming from. And the pickers are only allowed to pick the yellow bunches, which already has the phenolic ripeness. And when the grapes arrive, we do a quick desteaming and a very gentle, very long pressing, and we separate the free-running juice and the pressing, and we ferment it under temperature control. It's very, very important to ferment it under temperature control, because we want to keep the fruitiness of the wine. And one part of the wine is fermented in stainless steel, and the other part in barrels. So we don't have the oakiness spiking on the wine. We want to keep it in balance. And because of the balance, we have also some residual sugar in it, because we want to get harmony with the titratable acidity.
But I think that residual sugar is crucial. I really do, because this acidity is tremendously evident, and it's a sort of quite adult thing to say, give us more acidity. But if you took that acidity away, I think you'd be taking away the spirit of the wine.
Oh, yeah. That's the reason the Furmint wines in this winery, at Barta winery, never go through malolactic fermentation, because we don't want to take away that vividity, that freshness, what you are saying. It's so good you brought it up.
So I don't know, that's a very, very good point, Vivi, that you've just made. And we, people in the wine world talk about acidity a lot, and acid being the so-called backbone of a wine. And it can sound a bit like wine speak, but it's not really. It's just worth knowing a little bit about wine. Just as, if you're making a tomato soup or something, you always add a little bit of sugar in, because tomatoes are quite acid. So it's just about finding, the balance in a wine. But it might just be worth very quickly talking about malolactic fermentation, which is a fermentation. I'll do this very quickly, I promise. A fermentation that happens once the wines the fruit has been fermented into a wine. So the grapes have been changed into actual wine. And then there's a so-called fermentation, but it's not a sugar fermentation. It happens with bacteria. And what happens is that a very sort of sharp malic acid, which is the acid that's in sort of green apples, very appley, the malic, it's linked to the word apple, that's converted into something called lactic acid, which is a softer acid, a dairy acid, sort of more yogurty, more milky. And that softens the general mouthfeel of wines. And you'll find it, for example, in a lot of white wines, in white Burgundies, you get that creamy quality that comes out. And that's really where it comes from. It's a very, very important part. But some grapes are far better and far more expressive if they do not go through this process. And that's what Vivi is talking about here. Right, Vivi?
Yes, right. Thank you.
Saying it very well, but anyway, there you go. I find that. Shall we move on to the Ore Kirai, so that we can explore that a little bit more and some of the other winemaking techniques as well?
I think when people are looking at grapes like Riesling, grapes like Sauvignon Blanc, grapes like Grüner Veltliner, grapes like Albarino, those are the sort of grape varieties. If you like those styles of wines, most of those will not have gone through this malolactic fermentation, which it's very easy for a winemaker to stop it if they want to. It doesn't, it's not intrusive at all. It doesn't, you don't have to use chemicals and things to stop it. And a lot of modern winemaking, the kind of lovely, refreshing wines that we enjoy so much in this country, very few of those will have actually gone through malolactic fermentation. Lactic. It just says it, doesn't it? Milky, creamy, soft, lovely in a white Burgundy, sometimes lovely in a Chardonnay, not much fun in a Riesling or a Sauvignon Blanc or a Furmint.
Or a Furmint.
Yes. Yes.
So shall we move on to the second wine? And then Oz, I'd love to know your thoughts on this one. Now, obviously, this is from an older vintage than the Egg Kiss, which is 2019. This is 2015, but gosh, it wears it well. I'll pass to you.
I think that I love the fact that you've given us a chance to taste an older one as well. I know it's been made differently, and I'm sure Vivien will tell us in a moment, because this one, it's begun. It's sort of, you look at it and you swirl it, and it's got a few shards of gold in it, whereas the other one before was almost so white it hardly even had green in it. And this one here is much richer. Suddenly I'm in that world of yellow, ripe yellow peach plums like golden gages, or even going into the world of peach flesh. There's a waxy quality to the wine. There's a little bit of butterscotch, but the ferment acid relentlessly stays with you. Thank goodness it does. And I've put down a tasting note as though it was slightly sour custard. And this is the problem with wine tasting notes, honestly. I'm not surprised that people like me get shoved into Sue's corner sometimes. But the point about wine tasting notes is often things they suggest. It's not what they actually taste like, but it's things that each of us, our brain and our memory and our mind, just swirls around with suggestions. And so sour custard is mine. It's as though someone had mixed some lime juice or grated some lime into the custard and made it slightly sour. A little bit of fudginess there. But I think that again, I get this rocky dust, this minerally thing, which is good mineral, not just sulfide-y savoriness. It actually makes me feel as though there's some rocky dust, there's a hint of sort of baked toffee matched by lemon and lemon flower and lime. Really, really lovely stuff. And I think actually, Rebecca, this might be just a moment to mention Karoli Barta, and exactly why he's so important, because this vineyard called the Öreg Király, the Old King Vineyard, this was the Queen of Hungary's vineyard in 1280. That's 740 years ago. People were talking about this particular vineyard being a famous vineyard. In 1700, that's 320 years ago, they classified all the vineyards around Tokai. That's before anybody else in the world had decided to classify vineyards. And in 1737, again, that's ages and ages ago, they minutely classified every bit of vineyard. There's a fantastic map. Those are the vineyards, and those are all the people who own those vineyards. And this is the kind of detail. Look over here, how many people own how many tiny little plots. It's just like Burgundy. Now, Burgundy have been doing this for 1,000 years. Well, it's perfectly obvious that they've been doing it for 700 or 800 years at least in Hungary as well. But even though this was an astonishingly famous vineyard, and here we have it right in the middle here. And if you remember from some of those previous photos that Vivien showed us, the Király vineyard was like a wedge running up into a forest on the side of that hill. Well, in communist times, which was 45 years of Hungary's existence, Tokai was a very important part of Hungary's wine production, because the Russians liked sweet wines, and Tokai was a favorite sweet wine, a famous sweet wine, and it all got sent to Russia. But the trouble is, they paid for it normally in things like tractors, and these great big Soviet tractors just turned up. And if the Soviet tractor wouldn't actually go through the vineyard, they abandoned the vineyard. And of course, that meant that there were 11,000 hectares of Tokai. There are now only 5 or 6. There were 11,000 hectares, but it was all down on the flatland, where nowadays they're growing potatoes and cereal and sugar beet and things. And they could call it Tokai because, frankly, in Soviet times, you could call it what you liked. But it meant that this wonderful vineyard here, completely abandoned. Well, Karoly Barta did a fellow a favor in Tokai, and the fellow said, "Dude, how can I pay you back?" And Karoly said, "Oh, well, you know, I'm a bit of an agriculturalist." Although his family was an agricultural family, he was a very well-known and successful economist in Budapest. But he said he quite liked the idea of owning some vines at some time or other. And in 2003, this guy rang up and said, you may not like this, but there is a bit of land available to buy in Tokai. It's one of the most famous vineyards in Tokai, but it's completely covered in forest. And if you don't want it, don't worry, I'll find some better stuff for you somewhere else. But good old Karoly said, no, I'll pop down. I'll pop down. He said, okay, show me this. And he looked up at this hill. It's just forest. He said, let's walk up there. And I've walked up to the top of that hill. It is a hard walk. And he got to the top of this hill, scrabbling through forest. There's a thing called black locust trees, which seem to grow there. And he discovered that the thing was absolutely beautifully terraced with old ancient terrace. Again, you can see them if the photograph comes up again. The terraces backwards and forwards, they all still existed. The vines had gone, but the terraces were still there. And within a week, Karoly Barta had said, this is a fantastic challenge. I'm going to recreate the Oreg Kirai, the old king vineyard. And he's done an astonishing job. And he was the first of the people to take these high vineyards, the difficult ones, the abandoned ones, which the communists didn't want, and said, this is the glory of Tokai. And I've just got a quote here from one of his colleagues in Tokai, which said, the reclaiming of such a historic vineyard from abandonment had a symbolic effect on the entire Tokai region, showing what could be done and showing what must be done to restore Tokai to glory. Because 100 years ago, the vineyards were like that, not down on the floor. And bit by bit, I think, Vivien, you've got some more details as to these highland vineyards are now being replanted, aren't they? Led by Karoly Barta.
Yes, it has started in 2004 when Karoly Barta started to invest into the Oreg Király Dőlő, and now almost 1,000 hectares is replanted.
Oh, that much. Fantastic.
Yes.
Because that's where all the great vineyards were in the past. And when you look at that, that's a wonderful map, by the way, the 1867 map. And we'll see more and more of those coming back. And it was all started by Karoly Barta. So thank you very much, Karoly Barta. But now tell us more about how this wine differs from the Egikis.
So first of all, I would like to answer to a Q&A question. I think we have a wine geek because he or she is asking which grapes is the closest to from a genetic viewpoint for Furmint. And Furmint is the most closest grape is Guyas Blanc. I read that this is the offspring of the Guyas Blanc, and the ampelographer says it's most likely to be an indigenous grape variety to Tokai, because the most of the Furmint clones are in Tokai at the moment. And also, maybe you have heard of Shipon. Maslava or Mosler. These are the same grape variety as Furmint, but because of they are in another country, they have different names. So let's go back to the wine. Rectangular 2015. 2015 was a very warm and hot year with just a little bit of rain. So it was like a perfect year in the aspect of viticulture and the winemaking. The grapes were desteamed and pressed very gently. Again, into different tanks, pre-running and pressing. After cold setting, it was racked out only by gravity because we do not use any pump if it's not necessary. Into barrels, into 500-liter barrels, into second, third, and fourth field barrels, and it was fermented with temperature control in Hungarian oak barrels. We use for the single vineyard wines 500-liter oak barrels because we don't want to spike the oakiness on the wine. And after the fermentation, it was racked out, sulfured, and then put it back into the barrels and beyond fine list for 9 months. So it was aged on fine list for 9 months, and we didn't use batonnage technology.
I'm one thing, of course, that we haven't mentioned is that because the whole vineyard had been abandoned during the communist period. The communist period was that post-Second World War period when chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and fungicides became a part of winemaking, which became a seriously dominant factor in European vineyards. But this vineyard, because it was an abandoned forest, had never had any chemicals added to it at all. So we are talking here, are we, about a completely organic vineyard? Are you still using organic methods to grow the grapes?
Yes, surely we are 100% organic. And it's again something to do about the Barta family, about Karol, because when they purchased the land, it was for them, it was not like a decision, it was like a common sense to go organic, because as you mentioned, it has never seen any chemicals, any systematic spraying or herbicides. The wines are organic as well, and they are prepared with less intervention it can be.
Thanks, Vivi, for that.
I did notice that you said that, I think this is you who said this, Vivien, from my last trip, that if you wanted to stop powdery mildew, you could apply baking powder.
Yes, yes.
And you also said that you could spray sunflower oil on the vines and that would stop mildew, but it would make a dreadful mess, I'd have thought.
No, and we use also orange oil, and it's really good. It's very, very helpful. We spray a little bit most time, but you know, we are spraying only with this contact stuff, and when the rain is coming, it washes out all of this orange oil or sunflower oil or baking powder. So it's unbelievable good and very healthy as well.
There you go, Oz. That's your orange oil in your custard, you see.
Well, it must be, yes. The baking powder and the sunflower oil.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Vivi.
Yeah, and for example, if we see, so organic is always about prevention. So we have to see into the future. So when we are, for example, seeing there is a big rain coming, we must spray with water glass, for example, or for example, we have to watch out that we should remove a lot of leaves, especially from the bunches, because we must to spray the bunches straight away with this contact spraying stuff with this orange oil.
And of course, Furmint grape it's very tight clusters, isn't it? And quite thin-skinned, which of course is why, as we go on to the sweet wines, it rots easily.
Yes.
You got to get the right kind of rot.
Yes, it's a noble rot, and it's caused by the Botrytis cinerea. You know, Tokaji is very unique and very special, because I would say there is a meeting of four very important factors. One of those is the microclimate, and the other one is the soil, the volcanic soil, and also the indigenous grape varieties. So, for example, Furmint and Hárs-levelű is very easily infected by the Botrytis cinerea. This is a special fungi, and this causes the noble rot. Or let's say a little bit about the weather. We have two rivers, the Bodrog and Tisza. The Bodrog is a little bit more chilly than the Tisza, and at the meeting point there is a big humidity. And the Botrytis cinerea really like this humidity, so that's one of the reasons we got it in Ottoman times. We got the most Botrytis cinerea between the beginning of October and the end of November.
Mm.
Yeah.
It is interesting because natural noble rot, which concentrates the sugars but doesn't turn everything to vinegar, is pretty rare in the world of wine. And at Sauternes and Barsac, the ice cold Siron river comes in and joins the warm Garonne and creates all those mists every morning in the autumn. And it's the same with the Bodrog and the Tisza, isn't it? The Bodrog is warmer than the Tisza, and at the confluence, all these mists come up. I've seen the mists spreading right the way across. It's fascinating. Standing on a hill like Oreg Kirai, you could see if you started in the morning, mists coming right the way for miles up the mountainsides, and I suspect then gradually being burnt off by the sun during the day, just like Sauternes.
I'm going to raise my wand and encourage everybody now to pour a little Samarogny into their glass, because I think it's about time we moved on to the sweet wines in our glass now that we've started talking about them as well. And I'm very pleased that we can actually start to talk about how extraordinary this grape Furmint is in this region, is that it can produce these, very few regions can actually produce from the same grapes a dry wine in this sort of style and also sweet wines. It is extraordinary. And actually, whether it's to do with climate change or whatever, some of the world's well-known sweet wine regions are starting to find it incredibly challenging to have the conditions that go to create these magnificent wines. So it's very interesting to know that it's still actually very possible to create these styles in Tokaji, as it was from the very beginning. And actually, very interestingly, Oz, you just said the other day that you're quite sure that Tokaji was making these nobly rotten wines, a long time before Sauternes sort of claimed the crown.
It looks, from my readings of, luckily, translations of Hungarian, not an attempt to read Hungarian itself, but it does look as though Tokaji has been using these nobly rotted grapes since at least 1570. That's the first time that people start writing about it, in 1570. Well, the Germans vaguely thought that they might have invented nobly rotting grapes to make them sweet, and they didn't really put that down in writing till 1775. The people in Sauternes in Bordeaux thought, oh no, I think we probably invented it. Well, they didn't put that down in writing till 1845. Now, obviously, they'd been doing things before then, but I think probably the first time that anybody did it on purpose was in the 16th century, or maybe before then, in Tokai, because Tokai had it's bang in the middle of Europe there. It would have had a much more exciting life than somewhere like Bordeaux would have had 500 years ago. It would have been absolutely on all kinds of crossroads of Europe. And I just think if they're writing about it in 1570, then they were making it. And the thing about Tokai is it's not only is it amazingly famous from the fact it was probably the first wine ever made by these nobly rotted grapes, which are intensely sweet. One thing, by the way, about Tokai is it's a continental climate, and therefore it's dry. Bordeaux, where Sauternes is made, is a maritime climate where it's basically fairly damp. And the grapes in Tokai not only get this noble rot, which concentrates the grapes, but they also get shriveled. And so you can't actually directly press them. If you just tried to directly press the grapes in Tokai, which are really, really sweet, nothing would happen. In Bordeaux, you can get some juice out. So in fact, we'll talk about this actually a little bit later. Vivien, I hope, will tell us how to make these sweet wines, but it's a completely different way of making sweet wines. The grapes are shriveled and rotten, but to get the juice out, it requires an awful lot of effort. You just can't press the grapes. You actually have to macerate them and to release the juice. And that's this whole thing called the Azu method. But Tokai has been famous for hundreds of years. It was probably the most famous wine in the world 200 or 300 years ago. One of the reasons was it lasted forever. And another of the reasons was it was supposed to bring you back from the dead. And everybody drank it. I mean, Louis XIV drank it, Queen Victoria drank it, the popes all drank it, all the czars of Russia. Every time a czar of Russia or a pope thought, hang on, I'm just about to cop it, he'd say, quick, bring me a couple of bottles of Tokai, and they'd whop it back and presumably expect to be all hale and hearty the next morning. Actually, they all died as it happened. So I'm not entirely sure whether it works as a corpse reviver, although, having said that, Berry Brothers and Rudd, who are a wonderful rival of Rebecca's in London, they had. I've just gone blind. But they have some wonderful old wine lists, and after the Second World War, the wine was so able to age. They still had wines going back to 1811 on their list. Go back to 1811. It's 150 years old. They also used to publish what they might call sort of recommendations for the wine. I just got a couple here which I like. One of them says, send immediately 1 case of the wine that removes the screws from the coffin lid. It was an urgent request, but I'm not entirely sure whether it was actually the gentleman himself or his grieving wife who sent the order. Anyway, that was good. And this is my favorite. This guy wrote this. He said, "Your Tokai has given me good nights. I have a wine glass nearly full, and then the masseur's sister comes and rubs my back with a special liniment, and I curl up like a contented pussy and go to sleep. Yours sincerely, the Archbishop of Canterbury." Not quite, but that. So I mean, it's wonderful. Tokai. I mean, there was a shop in Warsaw in Poland, which in 1939 had 326 bottles of the 1606 vintage of Tokai. It had 2,000 bottles of the 1668. It had 3,000 bottles of the 1682. I mean, all these are 17th century wines. And then in one frightful weekend during the Nazi occupation, they went on a rampage through Warsaw, and they either drank or destroyed all the stock of 17th century wine left in the world in one awful, awful weekend. but it's a wine which has had a fantastic history. The Tsars, I mean, they had a ministry in St. Petersburg for the Tsars called the Commission for Hungarian Wines. They stationed Cossacks in Tokaj to make sure that Catherine the Great and Peter the Great and all these people actually got their supply of Tokaj. It was a fantastically important wine, and it all just fell to bits in the communist period, and now we're seeing a revival of this quite remarkable wine, which is not only sweet but is searing. It's a celestial sourness that runs through the wine, which makes all the difference to the astonishing richness in the wine. The acidity levels on these wines are 10, 12, 13, 14 grams of acid, maybe more, and that's a lot of acid, but the sugar is enormous as well, and it just works.
So shall we taste this wine now?
Yeah, let's taste this wine.
I'd love to be here for another hour, but if people are going to have dinner, we're almost at 8:30, so we do need to taste these two wines. But the Zamorodny, Vivi, would you like to just explain to us while Oz quickly tastes what Zamorodny actually means?
Yeah.
English.
So Zamorodny is a Polish word because Tokaj was very well sold. The Tokaj wines were sold very, very great in the 18th century. So they make up this word for this style of wines, and it means it's picked. The bunches are picked as they are. It means some of the berries are healthy, some of them are 20, 40, or 60, or maybe 90% botrytized. And we pick the bunches as they are, and we proceed them, we steam that, and we macerate them from 6 or 10 hours, press them, and we ferment them then. But when we are making an asu, we pick the berries, the asu berries individually, one by one. Can you guys imagine? We pick those berries really one by one, and one picker pick only like 5 to 8 kilogram asu berries per day. It's a very less amount, very small amount.
How would that compare with, say, picking grapes for Egekis?
So if we pick for Egekis, like one people picks like 40 kilogram per day. So it's very, very different.
I hear old ladies are the best. And that
yes, surely they are better than me.
Okay, the old ladies are saying, I can't do it anymore, but they're the best.
Yes, I feel ashamed when I go out and I pick with them because they are far away better than me. I almost didn't have to say what to pick because they already know that their eyes are just so quick. It's unbelievable.
So the Zamorodny wine, the as it comes or the pick it as it is wine that we've got here, which I think is beautifully balanced, by the way. I think it's absolutely delicious. And again, you've got this sort of leatheriness, this mineral waxiness running through, but delightful sort of sweet candied lime and halfway to pineapple, a little bit of fudgy richness as well. I must admit, I think it's the kind of wine I hardly need to even think of eating with. I just would sit there with a glass of this and contemplate the world. But could you just explain to us the difference between the Zamorodny and the Asu? How the Asu is this wine here, which we've got, there you are. Asu is the. Can you see those words, Asu, down there? But this is the very sweetest sort of Tokaj. Can you tell us how you get that sweetness out and how you make this sweetest form of Tokaj?
Yes. When we are making an asu, first of all, we have the asu berries, as I mentioned, picked one by one. We put it into a stainless steel tank, which bottom is perforated, and we can get out the essence. It's actually dropping out by its own weight. On the other hand, we have another barrel or tank, and we make an Asu-based wine, completely different. It's made as a Samarrodny is made. And when it's time, when, for example, in the case of 2016 Asu, when the Asu-based wine it's a fermenting wine, and it was between 9 and 11 degrees of alcohol, I transferred the wine into the press. I also put the Asu berries into the press. I start to macerate it. The Asu berries was very, very great, very, very high in acidity, in fragrance, in aromas, also very rich in sugar. So I macerated it for 24 hours. It's a very long maceration for Asu. And after 24 hours, I started to press it very gently. It means I pressed it like 0.2 and 0.3 bars. It's nothing. And only for a half hour. So it's as gently that the press even, the membrane even just touched the berries. And then I let ferment the pressing for 2 or 3 more weeks to get the flavors together, everything. And after I've chilled down the Asu, rack it out by gravity forcer and sulfur it, and let it be in the barrel for 2 years. The barrel was small barrel. It's a Sagamoro barrel. It's 228 liter barrel.
That's an interesting thing, Vivi. You said it's Sagamoro, which of course is French oak, not Hungarian oak. Why are you using French oak for this and not Hungarian oak? What does each one do? Because that's actually a quite an interesting question, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I love Hungarian oak. I love to use Hungarian oak, but in some cases I just feel that French oak is more fine. The grains are more tight, more close to each other, and it's giving a little bit of micro-oxygenation, just not as much as the Hungarian oak. And on the other hand, the French oak is a little bit less in, let's say, Christmas spiciness. The Hungarian oak has much more Christmas spiciness, and it sometimes I feel it's too much. It can be too harsh. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to this Asu-based wine, and the Asu berries was the very best Asu berries that I have seen until 2016. So I was like going to the best barrel that I can use. Wow. And I was so happy for it that Károly allowed to buy such a barrel.
So this Asu was actually your first vintage, wasn't it, of Asu? And we should talk,
at Barta, yes.
We should touch on it very, very briefly. Oz, if you can give, and I feel a bit bad because not everybody in the room has got this, because we there's just not enough of it apart from anything else, and we will bring some in. But Oz, would you like to just compare and contrast the Samarrodny and the Asu, and so that we can move on to the question and answer session quickly and not keep people too long?
It's much more intense, this. The acid is probably twice as high.
Wow.
But because it's so fabulously sweet, it would be too sweet without the acid. One of the problems that Sauternes, for instance, is having nowadays is they're ending up too sweet, and they're sort of ending up rather fat in the mouth. And people are thinking, I don't know, I'm not sure I could really want to drink too much of that. This acidity makes your mouth really water. And I think it's a thrilling acidity, and it goes across the whole spectrum of citrus fruits. The two I ended up with, having gone through sort of ugly fruits and tamarinds and God knows what, was lime and blood orange. But any of you could come up with something different. So in other words, the greenness of lime and the orangeness of blood orange. But you know how blood oranges are much more aromatic and exciting than a typical orange is. And that's what I was getting. The actual fruit in the mouth, because again, we've got a bit of maturity on the wine, although I'm sure that in 50 years' time, it'll be nice and dark in color, and we'd still be saying, this is jolly good. Vivien, tell us, how did you make this? And Vivien would say, oh, I can't remember. I can't remember. It's so long. But there's a quinciness about this. That quince does start coming good. And again, there's dried apricots and dry peaches, not sort of dry that you get in a health food store, sort of sulfur dried things, but just as though you'd had a perfectly good apricot and peach and it had just begun to dry in your own pantry or your own larder. There's lemon pith as well, that thing of pithiness, which is slightly bitter, slightly acid, slightly aromatic, and I must admit, when I'm eating citrus fruits, I look forward to a little bit of it. I normally, if I'm peeling an orange or something, I leave some of that pith on the outside of the orange because I want that slight bitterness as well. And I think it works absolutely tremendously, because citrus fruits are some of the most beautiful fruits in the world, and without acid, they're nothing. I mean, frankly, no fruit is worth eating without acid. An English apple, how good is an English apple? Because of its acidity. That's why we love eating them. That's what keeps them crisp. That's what keeps them fresh. That's what makes our mouth water, and it makes our brain think, this is delicious. I want another glassful of it. So I think this is a real delight.
Thank you, Oz. I think it's a real tribute to Carolee, Barta, and to Vivi as well. We're going to have to wrap up soon. We will have some questions in a minute too, but I really am just sitting here and having a moment, an hour or so, just to taste through just 4 wines, but such different styles, kind of, this sort of star jump of the Eggy Kiss, in all its kind of, brightness, and then you've got this sort of more Burgundian, more aged region. You have to have a oh, hi Carolee, how are you?
Lovely to see you.
It's good to have you here.
Here's a present for you guys.
Hello everybody.
All I need to do is to do my secret clicker and he comes on screen. And then we move from this wonderful sort of food-friendly style onto these sweet wines, and it's just so captivating, this grape and this region and this village of Mad, so well named.
I agree with you. I think it's one of the most exciting things that's happened in the last 10 to 20 years. We're looking at where does wine go. Galicia in northwest Spain has really started to make a name for itself in white wines. The Douro Valley has started to make a name for itself in red wines. Austria is finally beginning to be taken seriously for sweet and dry wines. And I think that, along heading east along the Danube, past Budapest to Tokaj, you've got a grape variety which is fabulously suitable to making dry, off-dry and sweet wines. And I think, Vivien, you're a star. I think you're doing fantastic stuff there, and with enthusiastic support from Carolee, I suspect.
Yes, he's a very good support of me. And may I go back just a little bit to the Asso and the Samorodni, because you speak lots of things about the acidity, and I must mention that the acid of the Asso was 13.2 and the Samorodni 6.7, and the sugar content in the Asso was 244.6, and in the Samorodni is 115. So we have a little bit of difference in the parameters as well.
But it makes absolute sense because they're both beautifully balanced.
Beautifully balanced, but the Asso is sort of like a super intense version of the Samorodni, almost, isn't it? And I hope that we'll have, on a future occasion, we'll have this crowd again, and we'll be able to taste it all together, because it really is the sort of apogee of this style, I would say.
We have 2 announcements. Firstly, anybody who really wants to know what Kate Shirt Kerem Obaratom Fizet means, It means, and this is the most important phrase any traveler could ever want, 2 beers, please. My friend will pay. And apart from that, this is the person who you need to get friendly with, because this is the winner of our bottle tonight, and the name is Ales Praznikar.
Who has won a bottle of this extraordinary wine, which actually won, wow, I mean, it won platinum in Decanter World Wine Awards this year, this extraordinary wine competition, which, you know, one of the best wine competitions in the entire world, and it has won the top gong. Well done, Vivi. Well done, Carolee. It's a fantastic achievement.
Yeah.